Natsuki was a total loser trapped in memories from his teenage years that just wouldn't leave him alone. That bitter feeling of trying everything to fit in and still coming up short really stung. Getting rejected by the girl he loved had burned itself into his brain like proof that, yeah man, looks matter. Natsuki's biggest wish was simple, but impossible. A second shot at life. It all starts in 2021, and Natsuki was sitting there thinking about something that seemed kind of dumb on the surface. What's even the point of rewatching a movie? Like, you already know everything that's going to happen. Where's the fun in that? But that's exactly what he was doing. Watching a movie he hadn't seen since 7 years ago. In it, the main character traveled back in time to find the girl he loved. And as Natsuki sat there watching, something started slowly clicking into place. When you already know what's coming next, you see everything differently. You can actually spot what you should have done instead. And then the memory hit. High school. That pathetic version of himself, trying his hardest to be outgoing, and crashing and burning every single time. Natsuki's teenage years were gray, lifeless, dull. Out on the porch, cigarette in hand, he sat with his thoughts. From all those mistakes, he learned enough to land a decent graduation, a decent job, a decent life. And on paper, it looked like he should have been happy with that. But the regret never left. It just sat there, buried in his chest, haunting him. Those wasted years were something he could never let go of. Instead of all those gray years, Natsuki had only ever wanted to actually live his youth, full color, no regrets. He remembered the day he confessed to the girl he loved, and how coldly she shut him down. Looking up at the sky, almost like a prayer, his only wish was this: go back and fix everything. Then he opened his eyes, and he was on the floor. When he looked in the mirror, he saw the round, chubby face of his own teenage self staring back at him. Namika opened the door wearing a school uniform, and at first Natsuki figured it was some kind of costume thing, like cosplay. But wait, Namika was a sophomore in college. Why on earth would she be in a high school uniform? That's when it started clicking. Natsuki remembered the wish he'd made. Could it actually have worked? He asked Namika what year it was. 2014. Natsuki grabbed his phone, opened the calendar, checked everything carefully, and yeah, it checked out. Even so, he couldn't bring himself to believe it. He figured it had to be a dream, a really vivid dream. So he lay down on his bed, closed his eyes, and waited to actually wake up. Time passed. The sun started going down outside. Mizuki came into the room to wake her son up and congratulate him on his graduation, apologizing for missing the ceremony because of work. She noticed he looked kind of pale, maybe a fever. Either way, Natsuki just wanted to sleep until dinner. But when he woke up, he was still there. This was no dream. Standing in front of the mirror again, Natsuki made a decision. Trying to figure out how any of this had happened would just be a waste of time. He wasn't going to blow this chance. He was going to redo his entire teenage life, turn all those gray years into something actually vivid and alive. And the best part, he knew exactly what he needed to do. After all, he'd spent years replaying every mistake, every embarrassing slip-up, every cringeworthy moment. He knew what he should have done differently. He had 1 month before high school started. 1 month to become the best version of himself. In comfortable workout clothes, eyes full of determination, Natsuki got to work. Sitting on a bench, out of breath, completely wiped from pushing himself so hard, he admitted to himself that the teenage Natsuki would have quit right then and there. But this time was different. This time, that teenage body was carrying a mind 7 years more mature. There was no way he was going through those miserable years again. He wasn't going to give up. Not a chance. And he didn't. A month flew by in the blink of an eye. Now he was in shape, prepared, ready to relive his youth the way he always wanted to. That's when he ran into a classmate from school. Miori had gone to school with him since kindergarten, so she recognized him right away. But she stood there squinting, because something had changed. And it wasn't just the way he looked either. It was something else, hard to put into words. Something different was coming off of Natsuki. Miori said that even back when he was that chubby, boring nerd, she always saw something in him. And then she went ahead and added that the cool Miori from before wasn't really around anymore. Cool? He shot back. You were always kind of a brat. Miori was caught off guard for a second, but her little dog yanked her by the leash before she could fire back. Still, she managed to call out, excited, that they'd be going to the same school. First day of school. Natsuki walked in and every eye in the room landed on him, which was a little uncomfortable. He took a slow breath, let it out, and looked up. And there she was, Hikari, the beautiful girl he'd wanted so badly, and who had turned him down flat. The two locked eyes for a moment, but they were interrupted almost immediately after. It didn't matter. Natsuki had already set his new goal: win Hikari over, and make her his girlfriend. While he was checking out who'd ended up in his homeroom, he heard a loud girl going off on the other side of the room. It was Uta, outgoing, a total chatterbox, the kind of person who fills every awkward silence without even trying. Next to her were two guys, Tatsuya and Reita. Reita caught Natsuki looking and quickly apologized for the two loud ones beside him. Natsuki just said, chill as ever, that he was actually kind of impressed by how well the three of them clicked. The three of them introduced themselves, and when Tatsuya got closer, Natsuki recognized him instantly. This was the guy who had humiliated him in the past. Tatsuya started throwing compliments at Natsuki about his physique. Then out of nowhere, a hand touched his abs. Obviously Uta. No shame whatsoever, getting a real close look at Natsuki's six-pack. When it was time to head into the classroom, Uta spotted Hikari and immediately pointed at her, completely blown away by how pretty she was, even walking right up to get a better look. Hikari was more than used to people gushing over her looks. Yuino, Hikari's best friend, launched into a whole thing about how popular and beautiful Hikari was. And that's when Natsuki saw the opening he needed. Yuino complimented Hikari, who brushed it off, drawing looks from everyone around them. How could a girl that gorgeous say something like that about herself? Natsuki jumped into the conversation, natural, not trying too hard. Hard to argue that you're not a beautiful girl. Hikari turned bright red, and Natsuki went pale with panic for having just let that slip out like that, without thinking. Yuino noticed her friend blushing, which was pretty unusual for someone so used to getting compliments, but it was a sign that the plan was actually working. When it came time for the class to introduce themselves, Natsuki was completely different. Night and day. Nothing like that humiliating moment from his past, when he tried to force himself to be the life of the party and ended up just embarrassing himself instead. A memory that still stung just thinking about it. The little group he'd just met invited Natsuki to check out some of the school clubs together. In the library, Hikari was chatting with a member of the literature club. How easily she connected with anyone confirmed something Natsuki already knew. Extroverts can get close to shy people with a natural ease that introverts will never have. At the basketball club, Hikari commented that Uta kind of acted like a little kid, probably because she was so all over the place. Uta took it the wrong way and thought it was a jab at her height and made it a whole dramatic thing. That's when Miori showed up and said hi to Natsuki. He froze up, terrified she was about to drag out some embarrassing story from his past, but she just said she could tell he was fitting in well. Miori glanced over at Reita with a little spark in her eyes, said he was cute, and pitched Natsuki a deal. She'd help him out with something, and in exchange he'd help her get with Reita. The whole group made plans to hang out on their free time, even if Uta's main agenda was obviously to set up a one-on-one with Hikari. When it was time to head out, Natsuki offered to walk with Hikari since she was heading home alone. On the way, the two of them decided to make a group chat to make it easier to stay in touch with everyone. Picking a name turned into a whole thing. Hoshimiya Fan Club? No, way too weird. Natsuki Fan Club? Even worse. Natsuki didn't even have fans. Natsuki Family, that's the one that stuck. Hikari swiped a photo of Natsuki to set as the group icon. Natsuki did the same thing right back, grabbing a photo of her on the spot. Hikari's fix was to just take a selfie of the two of them together. Then a message from Yuino popped up in the group chat. Stop flirting in the group chat. That was all it took for Hikari to want to disappear on the spot, and Natsuki smiled. The plan to finally have a colorful teenage life was starting to flow. At the end of the day, Natsuki gets a call from Miori. She wanted help digging up everything she could about that blonde guy she'd been eyeing, the whole thing they'd already talked about before. So the two of them meet up, and Miori looks Natsuki up and down with the face of someone who just witnessed a car crash. Like, who shows up looking like that to meet a girl? But it was literally the most decent outfit Natsuki owned. Miori's disappointment was written all over her face. Anyway, Natsuki was down to talk about Reita, but he wanted something in return, to hang out with that friend group like they'd agreed. He didn't even have to finish the sentence, because Miori already knew exactly what he needed. Clothes. And honestly, what kind of disaster could that fashion sense of his cause if left unchecked? By nightfall, Natsuki walked out of the store feeling good, shopping bags in hand. He thanked Miori from the bottom of his heart. She was like, literally the only person who could have helped him with this. With Natsuki now part of Reita's crew, it would be way easier for Miori to get close to the blonde. In exchange, she promised to go all out for the nerd. She'd make him cool, help unlock the extrovert that was clearly trapped inside him, and even help him navigate the start of high school. Maybe even find him a girlfriend while she was at it. The group finally got together to hang out. Tatsuya, Yuino, Uta, Hikari, Reita, and last but not least, Natsuki. Everyone looking fresh, ready to have a good time. As they walked, Hikari struck up a conversation with Natsuki about his outfit. He hesitated for a second. Did he look ridiculous? But Hikari was just giving him a compliment. Natsuki returned it by saying she looked nice. And Hikari immediately called him out. Nice? Not pretty? She was just messing around, of course. She was obsessed with men's fashion, and if she spotted a piece she liked, she'd buy it without a second thought. She was happy Natsuki thought she looked nice, and all that adorableness straight up hit him right in the chest. First stop was a sports center. Hikari's idea. Uta's energy went through the roof. They started with ping pong. Hikari was quick to talk herself up, saying she was actually good at it, even if she was terrible at pretty much everything else. Tatsuya called her bluff immediately, ready to put it to the test. She shut that down fast. Tatsuya was way too intimidating, so Natsuki invited Hikari to play a chill, low-pressure match instead. And again, that thought crept into his head. She's so cute. Uta and Tatsuya were both killing it, two veterans of having fun. Hikari, on the other hand, was an absolute disaster at every sport, including the ping pong she'd just hyped herself up about. Natsuki caught on fast, but she'd rather make excuses. It was Yuino who just said it straight. Hikari simply wasn't good at sports. Natsuki was confused. If she was that bad, why suggest a sports center in the first place? The answer was simple. Even being terrible, she had a blast. And that was that. Hikari is so cute, man. That was the only thought running through Natsuki's head the entire day. Reita and Tatsuya went at it. Pure rivalry energy. In the end, Reita wiped the floor with Tatsuya and didn't even flinch. Tatsuya immediately called everyone over for the next game. Natsuki asked if they couldn't take a breather first. Tatsuya spun around with that frustrated look on his face. "We don't have time for breaks." Natsuki deflated on the spot, like a puppy getting scolded. Reita noticed the tension. Because honestly, Natsuki had never had this kind of friendship dynamic before. Everyone gathered for a toast to starting high school. Uta announced, beaming, that they were all real friends now. Hikari found that absolutely adorable and patted Uta on the head. Yuino did the same to Hikari, calling her cute. Hikari told him to cut it out immediately. Reita caught a moment alone with Natsuki to bring up something sensitive. Tatsuya. Natsuki was caught off guard. He didn't even have to say a word because his face gave everything away. Reita confirmed it just from the look. He'd noticed that Natsuki's energy drained every time Tatsuya was around. Natsuki admitted it was true and gave props to his friend's read on the situation. Reita had always been observant, the kind of guy who sees what's actually going on beneath the surface. He hadn't said anything before because he figured it was just a matter of the two of them not being close yet. But this time, he felt something different. He felt fear, and he was right. Natsuki tried to convince him the problem wasn't Tatsuya. It was something internal. That painful memory flashed through his mind for a split second. He asked Reita not to say anything to anyone. He'd try to work through it on his own. Reita agreed. It wasn't his business, and because of that, it wasn't his place to say a word. Reita said he trusted Natsuki, believed he could get through it. And in that moment, Natsuki finally understood why every girl was into Reita. And it had nothing to do with just his looks. Everyone rushed onto the empty basketball court, and nobody lost it harder than Uta and Tatsuya. It brought back memories for Natsuki, from his life in the other timeline. A lonely time, but one where basketball was his escape. He kept playing even when everyone around him acted like he didn't exist. In college, when he had nothing left, it was those shots that kept him going. And even after all that time without touching a ball, the skills never went anywhere. Natsuki sank the shot clean, in a moment that left everybody speechless. The guy was genuinely good. This time, Natsuki felt lighter. Uta jumped with excitement. "Why aren't you on a basketball team? You're a natural!" She turned to Tatsuya, expecting him to back her up. But he was frozen, expression dead serious. When Uta snapped him back to reality, Tatsuya smiled and said he'd just been caught off guard. He gave Natsuki his props. Genuinely incredible. Natsuki brushed off the idea of joining a team, said he had work to focus on. Tatsuya threw down a challenge. He wanted to test Natsuki's skills himself, one-on-one. Natsuki took a deep breath and thought back to his conversation with Reita. He accepted, saying it'd be fun. The time to face that fear was right now, and he was going to play with everything he had. Uta and Hikari screamed Natsuki's name, going all in with the hype. Tatsuya was a little salty about the lack of support on his end, but he rolled with it. Natsuki glanced over at Hikari. He wanted to play well. He wanted to show off for her. The game was on. Natsuki thought back to the basketball lessons Tatsuya used to give in the other timeline. He pulled the same move he'd learned back then and bucket. The crowd went crazy. Tatsuya pushed forward with the ball, but Natsuki could predict every single move. After all, he'd watched every play, every technique, every detail of Tatsuya's style for 3 years in that other timeline. He pulled off a slick dribble and bucket. Tatsuya came back serious. No more playing around. He was lightning fast and got on the board. Natsuki looked over at Hikari again. I can't let him win. Gotta show out. Gotta make this happen. And then the most important memory hit him. In the other timeline, everyone looked down on Natsuki, tried to intimidate the nerd. But there was one person who always shut that down. Tatsuya, the team captain, who wouldn't let anyone talk trash about Natsuki, not even behind his back. It was because of him that Natsuki managed to stick with the team all the way to the end. His teenage years were rough, but they would have been so much worse without Tatsuya there. And that gratitude, it ran deep, back to the game. Natsuki stripped the ball right out of Tatsuya's hands, just as he was about to score the final point. In that instant, he understood. The fear he'd been carrying wasn't really fear of Tatsuya. It was the fear of being hated by him. Natsuki jumped, released the shot, and bucket! Tatsuya got bodied. Game over. Uta was the first to absolutely lose it over Natsuki's win. Tatsuya held that blank stare for just a second, and then broke into a grin. The next day, Natsuki was working at a cafe, and man, that kid had an insane talent with food. A coworker couldn't stop raving about him. To her, it was practically unbelievable that this was the guy's first job. Starting off that strong, Yuino also worked there at the same cafe right beside Natsuki, and honestly, even she couldn't believe the level this guy was operating at. After all, Yuino spent a whole month learning what Natsuki picked up in 2 days. 2 days, dude. The thing is, Natsuki had already worked in this kind of environment in the original timeline, on top of studying cooking on his own, at home, in his free time. Then, out of nowhere, Tatsuya, Uta, and Reita showed up to pay a little visit. Natsuki didn't exactly look thrilled, but Yuino welcomed everyone with that warm smile of hers. Natsuki walked over to their table just to ask if they had come all the way there just to be a nuisance. He was clearly in a bad mood. He'd already seen that crew at school earlier, so he was kind of over it. Uta thought that was pretty rude and decided to soften him up a little. She asked if he was happy that they were friends, if he actually had fun when they hung out at school, and then Natsuki admitted it. Yeah, he was happy. Uta just had that way about her, you know? Of convincing people that having her around was a genuinely good thing. Those two get along so well, Yuino commented. The words lit Uta up instantly, and she asked to take a photo of the two of them. Actually, she ended up snapping one of everybody. The photo she sent to the group chat left Hikari making a face. She was the only one with other plans and couldn't make it. Left completely out of the loop, poor girl. Since Natsuki was the one making the food there, the gang decided to place an order, just to put his skills to the test. Spoiler, don't sleep on him. The plates arrived looking almost too good to eat. Everyone picked up their forks and took that first bite full of anticipation. Natsuki waited for the feedback with that serious expression of his. Uta was the first to lose it, eyes literally sparkling. Like that moment when you switch your dog from the cheap kibble to the premium stuff and he looks at you like you're an absolute god. Reita said he'd tasted Natsuki's cooking before, but it felt like this time he'd thrown in something extra. Chef's secret. Tatsuya loved it too. And Uta, of course, already wanted a bite of his plate. She opened her mouth waiting for Tatsuya to feed her. The poor guy turned red and, completely flustered, just shoved the plate toward her so she could eat it herself. Tatsuya even commented that Natsuki's skill level was wild, considering he'd only just started working there. But then midterms started creeping up, and poor Uta, the girl knew absolutely nothing and could not care less about class. Unfortunately for her, the exams at that school were no joke. A failing grade meant retaking the test, and not retaking it meant getting benched from the club. Big problem. Tatsuya thought it'd be a good idea to invite everyone out, but everyone was stressing over studying. Didn't happen. Reita asked Tatsuya if he was planning to just wing the exam without studying. And of course, Tatsuya already had a plan. He'd skimmed through a textbook the morning of. What a disaster. That's when Reita came up with the idea of organizing a study session to save those two from tanking their grades. Time to hit the books. The first step was figuring out what Uta and Tatsuya actually didn't understand, so they could try to salvage the situation. But it's tough to know what you don't know, right? Natsuki found himself watching Uta's cheerful attitude even through all of this. Then he glanced over and caught Hikari looking totally lost, and quietly gave her a hand. Hikari's gentle thank you was enough to make his heart do something embarrassing. Her smile was genuinely dangerous, man. Uta decided to test Natsuki's smarts. He actually paid attention in class, right? Natsuki offered to help her. Uta showed him the part she didn't understand and, yikes, that was entry-level stuff. Uta was teetering on the edge of a cliff. Natsuki walked her through it step by step, but they were so close together that the proximity just hung in the air, weird and oddly charged at the same time. Uta quickly pulled back, apologizing. Tatsuya watched all of that with a look on his face that said he would have preferred not to. After that, every single day the group would meet up to study after school. Tatsuya was spiraling. He didn't really care about a bad grade itself, but he did not want to get suspended from the club. He asked if they could study on weekends too. Uta made the same request, and offered to bring sodas as a thank you. Everyone agreed, but made it very clear the sodas were unnecessary. Uta said Natsuki was way too kind, but they were friends after all. Sometimes he said awkward things, but that honestly just made him cooler. Then Tatsuya pulled Natsuki aside with a serious look on his face, started talking about how close he and Uta had been getting, and asked point blank whether Natsuki had feelings for her. Of course it wasn't like that. Natsuki came right out and admitted he liked Hikari, and Tatsuya looked like a massive weight had just been lifted off his shoulders. Natsuki asked who Tatsuya liked then, but the guy wouldn't answer. On another study day, Natsuki showed up later than usual. The moment he walked in, the first thing he did was ask what Miori was doing there, but she had also come to study, along with another friend. Uta, ever the helpful one, had already saved Natsuki a seat, right next to Miori because hey, they were childhood friends after all. Totally uncalled for. Miori sat there watching Uta and Natsuki with that analytical gaze of hers. Natsuki pulled a little notebook out of his pocket that he'd put together for Uta, with simpler, more straightforward explanations. The clarity of those notes was impressive. The guy had barely slept putting it together, but honestly it wasn't that hard for him. In the other timeline, he used to tutor people. He had the experience. Uta promised she'd work hard to do well, so Natsuki's effort wouldn't go to waste. Miori took the chance to go ask her little blondie a question, and Natsuki almost blew her cover, but took a kick to the shin before he could finish the sentence. Message received. Miori pulled Natsuki quietly to the side and gave him a heads up. Lately, Uta hadn't stopped talking about him. The girl was turning into someone completely smitten, and Miori, being Miori, volunteered to set the two of them up as a couple. Natsuki started thinking about what that would even look like, but he didn't get far enough to reach a conclusion. Uta appeared out of nowhere asking what the two of them were whispering about. Natsuki brushed it off, saying they were talking about her, but only because he was curious about how she'd been doing at games. On the way home, Natsuki ended up alone with Miori on the train. Miori said she'd been watching him, that Natsuki's high school experience was going really well. He said that was the plan, to redo the dull, colorless teenage years and turn them into something full of life. Miori laughed. Whatever. But then the mood shifted. She pointed right at him and said there was an obstacle in his path, and that he still hadn't noticed it. Told him to figure it out himself. At home, Natsuki couldn't shake that comment. His phone rang. It was Hikari, wanting to talk. Nothing too serious. Hikari wanted to know if he'd noticed that Tatsuya had been seeming kind of down lately. Could just be her imagination, she said. Natsuki pushed back, said he hadn't picked up on anything weird, that it was probably just in Hikari's head. Exam day arrived at school. Tatsuya greeted Natsuki with a cold handshake, zero energy behind it. The exam week dragged on, and finally ended. Everyone free, screaming at a karaoke bar. Natsuki was a little restless on the inside. He loved karaoke, went all the time. But he'd never gone with friends before. This felt different. Uta launched herself at him saying it was his turn to sing. He accepted and picked a song. And then came the surprise. Uta and Natsuki's music taste was almost identical. So why not just sing together? The two of them stepped up to the front and, man, what a moment. Natsuki poured everything he had into his voice, turning it into something way more beautiful than anyone expected. Uta went quiet. Everyone went quiet, blown away. When it was over, everyone clapped. Everyone, except Tatsuya, who was frozen solid. Uta wanted more, called Natsuki over to put together a playlist together. But then Tatsuya cut everything short, slammed his fists on the table, stormed out of the room without much of an explanation. Natsuki went after him, tried to help. Tatsuya didn't want to talk, told Natsuki to just go. But Natsuki pushed. Tatsuya snapped at him to shut up, and then broke down saying he felt pathetic. Even more so after Natsuki showed up being the perfect guy at literally everything. He left asking Natsuki to forget the whole thing, said it wasn't his fault. Reita appeared then, with the face of someone who already saw this ending coming. Tatsuya was jealous of Natsuki. It all started with basketball, the one thing Tatsuya was genuinely great at, and Natsuki went and absolutely bodied him. Then came the insane cooking, the intelligence, the killer voice at karaoke, all of it making Uta more and more drawn to him. But what did Uta have to do with any of this? Natsuki was the only one who hadn't figured out that Tatsuya was in love with her. Man, Natsuki admired Tatsuya so much. All he wanted was to earn the guy's friendship, not trigger some jealousy spiral. But Natsuki still couldn't quite wrap his head around how Tatsuya really felt on the inside. Reading people's emotions had always been his biggest blind spot. Time flies, and Natsuki's new high school life was everything he'd ever wanted. That's why he'd prayed for it. He wanted a rainbow in that gray teenage wasteland. And the shift from a colorless youth to one full of life? It was actually going pretty well. Natsuki believed he was pulling it off, but things changed after Tatsuya's decision, and that vibrant rainbow slowly faded from the sky. By the time he got to school, he wasn't even saying hi to anyone anymore, and nobody knew what had happened with Tatsuya. The whole friend group fell apart without him around. Those were some rough days, no cap. Natsuki was losing the best version of his life all over again, slipping back to where he started. And that gray abyss? It was calling him home. A little while later, Natsuki and Uta were checking out the class rankings on the board. Natsuki was number 1, and thanks to him, Uta had managed to land at 110th. It wasn't great, but at least she stayed in the club. A couple of girls a little further away were whispering Natsuki's name, saying nice things, just not to him. Oh my god, his face is literally my type. And he's so smart. Natsuki is basically perfect. Uta invited Natsuki to hang out on Saturday, with this hopeful little smile. But Natsuki turned her down the second he remembered Tatsuya's jealousy over Uta. That feeling was way too heavy for him to ignore. Time to head home, and of course, it was pouring. Natsuki didn't even care. He walked out into the rain like he belonged in it, while regretting that prayer he'd made. In the end, nothing had changed. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of raindrops hitting an umbrella. It was Miori. She came over and offered to be there for him, because she could tell something was off. Natsuki wouldn't be this down in the dumps for no reason. Not him, but he didn't want help. At that point, nothing was going to fix anything anyway, and he stepped away from the umbrella. Miori at least carried his bag. She wanted to help. She was his childhood friend after all. The two walked together while she tried to figure out what was going on. That's none of your business. Yes, it is. I promised to help you build a colorful high school experience. Natsuki, completely checked out, had already given up on everything. He told Miori to drop that promise. He didn't need it anymore. Finally home, Natsuki stepped out of the shower, walked into his room, and found an intruder lying on his bed. Miori was looking around. That room hadn't changed one bit since she used to visit back in kindergarten, but she was there for a reason. She was reading one of Natsuki's nerd books, an absolutely unhinged one. Natsuki lunged at her to snatch back the source of his humiliation. She told that virgin to chill out, and just started snapping photos of his room. To commemorate the visit, apparently. Natsuki asked about basketball practice. Turns out Miori had ditched it, because unlike Uta, she wasn't exactly the kind of player who made a difference on the court. But anyway, none of that mattered right now. Miori brought up Natsuki's plan. It was genuinely impressive that he was ranked first in the whole grade. He was actually taking the plan seriously. That plan was part of why Miori had skipped practice, but the real reason was Uta. She'd been acting weird. Miori tried to find out why, but Uta wouldn't say anything. And since half a piece of gossip is the worst thing in the world, Miori went straight to Natsuki. Plus, she wanted to help him, right? That's just the kind of person she was. Natsuki had lost faith in the plan. He was shaken, but he wasn't alone. Miori was there to ease that weight off his chest. She reached out and gently touched his hair, just like she used to when they were little kids. But Natsuki didn't let himself go there. He said he didn't want to be close to Miori anymore. She felt the sting of that, of not having been there for him in middle school, even though Natsuki was the one who had chosen to pull away back then. Seeing Natsuki like this brought back memories. She'd always been there, back when he was a total mess. Natsuki used to be terrible at everything. Miori understood his heart. She told him to just be who he actually was instead of playing the tough guy act. And then, Natsuki's tears started falling. The pain was finally leaking out, little by little. The next day, the mood was heavy. Natsuki walked into school and made his way straight toward Tatsuya. He wanted to have a little chat, somewhere private. The two of them headed up to the rooftop. Natsuki wanted to talk because they were friends, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Tatsuya had already asked to be left alone. Maybe it was better for everyone if he just kept his distance. Natsuki obviously didn't see it that way. Tatsuya was feeling jealous, and Natsuki didn't want that. They were friends. Pulling away wasn't the answer. Natsuki brought up Uta, and that's what made Tatsuya actually stay. Tatsuya was in love, had been for years. He had no idea how to get Uta away from Natsuki. He couldn't compete with him in anything, even basketball, which was supposed to be Tatsuya's whole thing. He still lost even when he gave it everything he had. But Natsuki hadn't come up there to apologize, like Tatsuya expected. He came to read him for filth. Same way Miori had done to him. She'd slapped him with the truth. This whole situation was so stupid. This was on Tatsuya, because he had no business involving himself in Natsuki's relationships with other girls. The only move was to throw reality straight in his face. Natsuki went in and called Tatsuya a coward and an idiot straight up, blind for not seeing that nobody is perfect. Natsuki wasn't perfect, dude. He worked his butt off to have a decent high school experience. He did everything carefully and deliberately. It might have looked effortless, but it wasn't. Tatsuya had absolutely no reason to be jealous. He needed to face Natsuki head on, but Tatsuya didn't believe a word of it. He said Natsuki did everything with ease and came out perfect every single time. Natsuki threw it right back at him. Tatsuya was naturally outgoing, made friends like it was nothing, while Natsuki was drained by literally everything he tried to do. He pulled out his phone to show Tatsuya the truth, to shatter that fake image. He'd made this decision after Miori explained Tatsuya's side of things. Natsuki never let his flaws show, so of course people thought he was some kind of perfection god. He needed to show who he actually was. He was nervous, but he didn't hesitate. He shoved the screen into Tatsuya's face, a photo of a chubby Natsuki. Tatsuya still wasn't fully convinced, though he was definitely a little shaken. He put his finger on the screen and swiped, and there they were, anime girl characters, the kind that pull in guys exactly like Natsuki. And that dumb little detail was what finally got Tatsuya to believe him. Natsuki said how much he actually looked up to guys like Tatsuya. That hit Tatsuya hard. Being admired like that. Everything Tatsuya had been feeling toward Natsuki, Natsuki had been feeling the exact same thing toward him. The jealousy wasn't one-sided at all, so Tatsuya needed to come back to the group. And on top of that, he needed to stop playing it safe and go after Uta. Natsuki smirked. "Don't tell me you're scared to come at me directly." Honestly, Natsuki was the scared one. Tatsuya said Natsuki was being really bold for someone who looked like, well, that. And Natsuki got all in his feelings about it. He was way too easy to get to, poor guy. But that was the moment he finally said what he actually felt. How he was just keeping up an image. How he was an awkward, nerdy guy nobody would want to deal with. And how he'd been learning everything step by step, the hard way. They finally understood each other. The sun broke through the clouds over their friendship. But how was Tatsuya supposed to rejoin the group? Just show up out of nowhere like nothing happened? Natsuki said he'd have to tell the truth, word for word. "I've been totally into Uta-chan. And I got jealous because her and Natsuki got close. That was wild. So embarrassing." Some girl voices popped up from nearby, but they weren't ghosts, and they definitely weren't angels. It was 3 gossip girls and a wolf in sheep's clothing. Reita said he'd tried to stop them, but the girls wouldn't let up. They'd heard everything. Poor Tatsuya. Uta, embarrassed and worried at the same time, tried to let Tatsuya know she only saw him as a friend. Brutal words. Tatsuya's soul left the building after hearing that from the girl he loved. If Reita hadn't stopped Uta from saying more, there's no telling where Tatsuya's sanity would have ended up. Yuino also got stressed about something that was honestly a non-issue. The audacity. Then they exposed Natsuki's whole front, and now they wanted to see the photo he'd shown Tatsuya. It was an ambush. Tatsuya was down bad, but he pulled himself together just enough to throw Natsuki under the bus. The argument didn't get far thanks to Reita, the real one in the group. Tatsuya calmed down and told Uta that he wasn't giving up on her. Uta felt that. A warm feeling spread through her chest, and finally, the rainbow appeared after days and days of rain. After everything, Natsuki was thanking Miori at the cafe where she worked. Miori had been the reason Hope came back. She loved both versions of Natsuki, but don't read too much into that. That same night was a heavy one for Uta, who sat there thinking about Natsuki. The ache of knowing that the heart of the person you love already belongs to someone else. Natsuki sat there genuinely grateful for Miori's support, except she was already calling in the favor. Well, he didn't really have a choice. He had to return the help somehow. That night, Natsuki was still on the clock, and there was Yuino, also working as always. She was watching the cafe floor and tuning into the music playing overhead. Jazz. Natsuki brought it up, asked Yuino if she was really into that kind of music. She said not particularly, but that she was actually a classical music nerd and had been playing piano since she was 3 years old. Natsuki said he'd love to hear her play sometime, but the conversation got cut short when a customer walked in. It was Miori. She'd come back because she wanted to hang out with Natsuki and told him she'd just wait until his shift ended so they could walk home together. Natsuki was totally fine with that, until Yuino got suspicious. "Are you two dating?" That hit a nerve. Natsuki's answer was a hard no, but Yuino wasn't buying it. Like, only a girlfriend would wait around for a guy just to walk home with him. Anyway, the shift finally ended. Miori and Natsuki were heading home, walking side by side while he said something about how a girl probably shouldn't be out so late at night. Miori was not thrilled to hear that. She couldn't believe he'd actually say that to a girl as cute as her. But then she caught herself thinking something positive. It seemed like spending time with her was actually helping Natsuki get more comfortable around girls. Just don't catch feelings for Miori, dude. She's already Reita's. The two of them were on the subway. Miori said she finally wanted to put a plan into motion. The only reason she hadn't done it sooner was because she'd been waiting for Natsuki's friend group to sort out their drama first. Natsuki thought about it. At first things got weird when everyone found out who he really was, but that whole reveal actually ended up bringing the group closer together. Still, he needed to make a move with Hikari, so he went straight to the point and asked Miori what the plan was. She laid it out with full dramatic flair. The legendary double date, the lineup, Miori, Reita, Natsuki, and Hikari. Natsuki shut it down immediately. He was way too embarrassed. Miori thought that was ridiculous. Like, this one outing could fix 2 relationships at once. The next morning at school, at E, Natsuki headed to the library. Pretty unusual for him, but this time he had a reason. He just wanted to talk to Hikari. She seemed surprised to see him there, and asked what book he was looking for. Natsuki told her he'd really gotten into a book she'd lent him and was looking for something similar. The moment he realized the conversation was actually flowing, he decided it was time to go for it. Just don't stumble over his words. He turned to Hikari and said, "This book got adapted into a movie, right? What if we went to see it together?" Hikari paused before answering, but she said yes. Except Natsuki caught that hesitation. Something felt off, and it got worse when she asked if they could invite more people. Natsuki's anxiety kicked in hard. He started spiraling, thinking Hikari didn't want to go alone with him because she thought he was weird. He pulled himself back together with a smile and said Miori would come too. But then Hikari thought she'd just be getting in the way of those two, so maybe she shouldn't go. Natsuki fixed it by saying he'd invite Reita too. At that, Hikari put 2 and 2 together. Did she realize Natsuki likes her? Nope. She realized Miori likes Rita. That's what did it. She agreed right away, since she'd already wanted to see the movie anyway. Now all that was left was Reita's answer. He told Natsuki he'd been dying to see that movie, so if it worked out, he was in. Right after Reita left the room, Uta showed up. Natsuki's stomach dropped. What if she'd overheard everything about the outing? Sure enough, Uta immediately asked if he was going to see a movie, and said in the saddest little voice that she wanted to go too. Natsuki told her which movie it was, and asked if she was into it. She said no, she had zero interest in that film, but even so, why not go anyway? Natsuki knew he had Uta's heart, but she didn't have his. To answer her, he said that if she wasn't really into it, she'd probably have more fun skipping it. She took it on the chin, but asked if they could hang out some other time, just the two of them. Natsuki didn't say no. He told her he actually did want to do something with her. That brought the smile back to her face. But Natsuki didn't feel great about it. He didn't want to be the reason Uta stopped smiling, but he had no idea what to do. He'd never been in any kind of relationship before. On the way to the outing, Natsuki and Miori were riding the subway together. He brought up Uta, and Miori's advice was to keep her close. Natsuki thought that sounded seriously messed up, straight up leading her on. So Miori flicked him on the head and told him that kind of thinking was exactly why he was still a hopeless rookie at dating. Plus, he could end up actually falling for Uta at any point. Miori asked why he didn't just go for Uta instead of the other girl. She's fun, she's sweet, what a waste. Natsuki knew that better than anyone, man. But Hikari was his whole world. Well, as long as Uta wasn't asking to make things official, there was no real reason to push her away. That conversation actually made Natsuki feel a whole lot better. The four of them finally met up. They decided to walk around a bit before the movie started. Miori and Hikari were chatting about their outfits when Natsuki gave Miori a little signal. She came over whispering that she couldn't just hover next to Reita the whole time. It'd be super obvious. Reita showed up right at that moment, saying the two of them really did seem super close. Both of them immediately denied it, acting like they'd rather keep as much distance as possible. Hikari pulled Natsuki aside, just to give Reita and Miori some space to actually enjoy each other's company. During the movie, everyone was pretty chill, just watching, while Hikari kept stealing Natsuki's attention without even trying. Afterward, everyone went to grab some food. Reita and Miori had already demolished their plates while the other two had barely touched theirs. But eating fast was just part of life when you're in a sports club. Everything was going great, until 3 girls from the basketball team showed up and started giving Miori grief for skipping an optional practice. They eventually left, and Miori apologized for killing the vibe. Apparently there was some drama on the team, but it was nothing serious, she said. At the end of the night, Hikari said her goodbyes and rushed off, and as Miori and Natsuki were heading out, Reita asked for a quick second alone with Natsuki. Reita started talking about Miori, said she'd always come across as super independent, but that Natsuki seemed to be the exception. He also noticed she trusted him more than almost anyone else, and then Reita asked Natsuki to look out for her. The two of them were on the subway, a heavy silence hanging between them. That silence finally cracked when Miori apologized for the outing not going as planned strategy-wise. Natsuki said that if everyone had a good time, there was nothing to complain about. The silence settled back in. Natsuki got uneasy, but tried to say something to Miori. She cut him off before he could, told him not to worry about anything. The next day, Natsuki decided to stop by and watch basketball practice. Miori was playing like she had something to prove, and she was incredible. Uta was watching too. You could tell something about Miori felt off. Natsuki wanted to help, but he knew it wasn't his place. Another basket. The issue was between Miori and the girls on the team. Way too complicated to step into. She spotted Natsuki up in the bleachers and called him down for a quick talk. All just to remind him that he didn't need to worry about anything. Miori walked away, saying it was none of his business. Uta came over to talk to Natsuki, and it was about exactly that. She started explaining that Miori had been named a starter even though she was only a freshman. But she and Wakamura had gotten into it over that skipped optional practice, and Wakamura had called Miori arrogant. That caused Miori to pull away, and things on the team got super tense and weird after that. Could just be jealousy. Like, if Miori wasn't on the team, Wakamura would be the starter. Uta said she wanted to help Miori. She was her closest friend after all, but the older girls wouldn't listen to her. It was really wearing Uta down, because she couldn't stand watching people talk trash about others. But she knew there was nothing she could do. Uta walked away saying she'd do everything she could to see Miori doing okay again. Then Tatsuya showed up, saying the whole thing was stupid. He'd been listening to everything, but honestly didn't even need to. He watched this kind of stuff play out on the team every single day. He said the reason Uta was so upset was that she cared too much. and that if Wakamura was the one causing all of this, he'd go deal with her himself. He was joking, but the way Tatsuya said it, it really didn't sound like it. He knew stepping into that fight wouldn't actually help anything, and he admitted Miori was seriously talented, but it was obvious she didn't trust the older players at all. That night, Natsuki was home. Thinking about Miori, he realized it was true. The Miori he knew played as a team. She never relied only on herself. There had to be a reason she'd stopped making passes, but he knew if he asked, she wouldn't tell him. Uta called Natsuki. When he picked up, she asked if they could switch to a video call. Natsuki dropped his phone to go make himself look a little more presentable, full-on panicking. When he got back on the call, Uta asked if he was nervous, because she was. He was too, he just didn't say it. The reason Uta wanted to video call was simple. She just wanted to see Natsuki's face. Seeing him on screen made her happy. That made Natsuki even more flustered. The tension was real, bro. Uta got up to grab some water, and Natsuki noticed something that made him decide to play dumb. Anyway, what Uta actually wanted to talk about was the whole situation. She'd gotten chewed out by Wakamura just for suggesting a way to fix things. Wakamura told her to stay out of it, and that it wasn't her problem. Uta had also tried talking to Miori, who told her not to worry about it. That stung. She hadn't been able to help her friend at all. Natsuki didn't want to see either of them more down than they already were, so he shared a plan with Uta, something that might actually help sort things out. The next morning, the second Miori saw Natsuki, her face went flat, and she asked what the heck he wanted. Natsuki invited Miori to come hang out at the court with him. He was going to teach her how to play basketball. When they got there, Uta was already there as backup and handed Miori her shoes. Everything was set to get started. Natsuki and Miori were going head to head. At first, Miori seriously doubted his skills. Like, who even was this guy to be talking so much trash? But Natsuki told her to just walk away if she was scared. That got under Miori's skin big time. The deal was crystal clear. If Miori won, Natsuki would be completely at her mercy. But if she lost, she'd have to open up and tell him everything that had been bothering her. The game barely started, and it was already over. Natsuki nailed the three-pointer no problem. He knew from the jump he was going to win. Miori still didn't get why Natsuki was so set on making her ask him for help. To him, the idea was simple. He wanted her to feel like she had to lean on him, since he'd already stepped in to help her before. He told her she absolutely had reasons to ask for help. Because they were friends, Uta also felt like it was on her to help. She wanted Miori to know she could count on both of them, but to Miori, asking for help meant being weak. She knew she wasn't strong, but she at least wanted to look like she was. Natsuki sighed and asked her to stop putting on a tough act around him. He wanted to be a safe space for her, and he just pulled her into a hug. Miori let it all out. She said she was going through a really rough time, that everything hurt so much. With tears in her eyes, she finally asked Natsuki for help. And that hug? It just didn't end. Like, Miori pulled back from his arms, joking that Uta was going to get jealous. And honestly, Uta was right there, sulking. Miori made one request to Natsuki, that he wouldn't ditch her again, like he had before. But that didn't matter anymore. They were getting closer now. Then it was time for Miori to explain everything. She said the problem started right after she made the team. She had been so happy to be named a starter. It meant they actually recognized what she had, but she let it go to her head. She thought she was all that for being that good and that young. Until she overheard a conversation between some of the girls on the team. They were saying Miori had been acting arrogant and annoying just because she was a starter. In that moment, the hurt hadn't fully hit yet. But at the next practice, when she couldn't pass the ball to one of the players, it came across like selfishness. Like she thought only she was good enough to make a play. Nobody knew she actually struggled with that. Miori asked Natsuki for advice and, well, first she needed to get past that issue with her passes. Natsuki passed the ball to her and she sent it right back. They went again, and it was smooth. But when it came time to pass to Uta, Miori fumbled it. It was weird, honestly. With Natsuki, no problem at all. The three of them tried again, and this time everything clicked. It seemed like Miori had finally gotten over that block. But would it be the same story with the veterans on the team? She wasn't feeling that confident. She was still all in her head about this fear, just because some people had talked trash about her. It felt like a massive wave crashing right in front of her. But Miori wanted to become strong enough to tune it out. Even if it was hard, Natsuki got that better than anyone. That wave is impossible to just ignore. Nobody's built like that, because words are the most brutal weapon a person has. So he told Miori exactly what he wished someone had told him back then. I got you. I'll listen to whatever you need to say. Whether it's venting, complaining, anything. Miori felt this huge weight lift off her. A little embarrassed, she thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Uta was just standing there, watching the whole situation unfold. She'd honestly lost the motivation to even help these two, but she had no choice. She was going to be there for Miori like the best friend she was. That night, Miori texted Natsuki. She said Uta had been setting a really good vibe and that she'd managed to pass the ball to Wakamura. She was slowly getting it together. Natsuki was chilling in bed when the doorbell rang. He told his sister to get it, but it wasn't long before Namika was calling him from downstairs. It was Miori at the door. She said the reason didn't matter. She just wanted to talk to him outside for a bit. Namika got suspicious about whatever was going on between them. Like, they had drifted apart all through middle school, and she threw in that, unlike Miori, Natsuki was the dramatic one. So he told Namika to shut it. She was already getting on his nerves. Miori and Natsuki headed out walking down the street, even though it was late and kind of sketchy for that hour. Miori stopped to say what was on her mind. Do you think you could come watch the game tomorrow? Obviously, Natsuki was going to be there to cheer her on. The next day, just like he promised, there was Natsuki, watching the game that hadn't even started yet. Miori was so happy when she spotted him. She even got a little goofy about it. The game was on. Miori, as always, was playing out of her mind, and she actually pulled off the pass. She even went up to Wakamura and told her she was going to set her up. And she delivered. Bucket! Natsuki clapped. He could already tell he didn't need to worry about Miori anymore, but Uta was the one worrying about him. The next day, Natsuki was sitting on a bench, nervous, and the reason showed up shortly after. Also nervous, Uta and Natsuki were going to a festival together. She had invited him as her date, and he hadn't said no. The two of them were walking through the festival, both kind of awkward about it. Uta broke the ice and asked what Natsuki thought of her outfit. He answered honestly, she looked really good. The festival atmosphere was just so nice, especially with Uta all happy watching everyone having a blast. She stopped and said she wanted cotton candy. Natsuki just stood there staring at her, which made Uta a little uncomfortable. She asked him to stop looking at her like that. She was lying. Uta really wanted him to keep looking. She just didn't want to admit it. Uta was finally digging into her cotton candy, and Natsuki was already starting to get hungry himself. Uta had mentioned her family owned an okonomiyaki restaurant and set up a booth at festivals, but there was no way she was going over there with Natsuki. Her parents would see them together, so they decided to get yakisoba instead. It was so good. Natsuki said yakisoba somehow tastes better at a festival. Total placebo effect. No cap. Uta ate half of it and handed the rest to Natsuki. He immediately thought about an indirect kiss, but figured she probably wasn't even thinking about that. In reality, she was low-key freaking out inside, and she bounced from there real quick, saying she was going to grab something to drink. The two of them started walking through the festival again. Uta grabbed onto Natsuki's sleeve, saying he might get lost. A shooting game booth. How about stopping by? Natsuki seemed like he'd be good at it, right? He was always playing games in front of the TV at night. Uta was down for a challenge. She wanted to see who had better aim. Uta finally hit something, except she hit a target that was completely nowhere near what she was actually aiming for. She handed the little keychain she'd won over to Natsuki. He wanted to pay her back for it, but out of nowhere, Natsuki pulled her into his arms, so she wouldn't bump into some random stranger. Right then, they both noticed just how much taller he was than her. Like, a lot. And how perfectly Uta fit in Natsuki's arms. They locked eyes. Old memories came rushing back. The vibe was totally blooming in that moment, but Natsuki's heart got in the way of everything. Uta knew what was happening and stepped back out of his arms. They went over to write wishes on Tanzaku strips. They were both writing, except Uta didn't want Natsuki to see hers. Natsuki's wish? To have a perfect youth, and Uta thought that was genuinely beautiful. When it was time to hang them on the bamboo, Uta paused, thought about it for a second, and she didn't want to hang that wish up. She swapped it out for the same one Natsuki had written. At the end of the festival, Natsuki walked Uta home. On the way, she filled him in on how the team was doing. Miori had patched things up with the veterans, and the whole team was stronger for it. Uta took Natsuki's hand. She told him not to read into it, but walking like this just felt really nice to her. When they got to Uta's place, they said their goodbyes. Their hands let go, but if that was all it was, it would leave way too big of an empty feeling inside her. She wasn't done yet, so she ran back to Natsuki and pulled him into a kiss. She wanted him to understand what she was feeling, but it was still too soon for words. Uta wasn't giving up on winning Natsuki's heart. It didn't matter who it belonged to right now. She was going to make him see her. Now that was a much better goodbye. Two people enjoying the ocean breeze, bathed in moonlight. The girl leans in and brings up how beautiful the moon looks, how stunning it is tonight. He replies that the moon only looks that beautiful because they're watching it together. When she hears those words, the girl breaks into a smile, like flowers blooming in spring. This romance is actually a story Hikari is writing. Dude, she was obsessed with books. She stared at her laptop screen, wondering what was missing from the story. It just wasn't quite there yet. Someone knocks on Hikari's bedroom door. asking if they can come in. And before letting her dad in, she shuts the laptop. Real quick. Natsuki stood at the classroom doorway, trying to shake off all the nerves he was feeling. The moment he opened the door, the girls greeted him with a cheerful, "Good morning," and the look on Uta's face instantly brought him back to that night at the festival, when they'd shared a little kiss. Natsuki sat down next to Reita, who jumped straight into pointing out that Natsuki was the kind of guy who wore his heart on his sleeve. He'd had feelings for Hikari, but now, pretty clearly, he had feelings for both Uta and Hikari. And honestly, that was true. So Natsuki just asked Reita to please not say that out loud. Reita flashed a big grin and said he'd have his back no matter what, as long as Natsuki left Miori for him. At lunch, the group got together to throw around ideas for summer. Uta went first. She wanted to go to the mountains or the beach. But everyone agreed the beach was the obvious winner. The problem was that Tatsuya was completely broke. So to fix that, Uta invited Tatsuya to work at her parents' shop over the break. Everything was set. They just had to nail down the date and time. The ever-emotional Natsuki was beyond hyped about going on a summer trip with his friends. This is what being young is all about. Hikari, on the other hand, wasn't feeling so bright. She really wanted to go, but she already knew exactly what obstacles stood in her way. Natsuki was already at work with Ueno, and asked her whether it'd be hard for Hikari to make the trip. Since Hikari always headed home early whenever the group hung out, he figured there was some kind of strict situation at home behind it. Ueno sighed and broke it down. Hikari's dad was a seriously stubborn and strict man. There was almost no way he'd allow her to go on a trip with a group that had boys in it, but there was still a little hope. At home, Natsuki was on the phone with Miori, talking about the beach trip. All Miori could think about was the fact that Natsuki just wanted to see Hikari and Uta in bikinis. He got a little flustered before insisting that was totally not true. Miori threw fuel on the fire, mentioning that she'd just gotten out of the shower, and since it was hot, she was just in her underwear. Natsuki turned bright red at that little piece of information. Eventually, Miori laughed it off and circled back to the trip. After doing a little research, she came up with a spot suggestion, and then said her goodnights. She was going to bed. The next day, Natsuki was walking into school when someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was Hikari. He went a little starry-eyed, just taking in how pretty she was, but he pulled himself together out of nowhere and said, "Good morning." Hikari said she was in a great mood. Her grades had gone up and summer was right around the corner. Natsuki agreed that was awesome, until the conversation with Ueno crept back into his mind. He brought up the trip with Hikari. If she ended up not going, would it be because of her parents? Hikari suspected Ueno had told him something, but Natsuki denied it. So she opened up a little. Her dad was incredibly stubborn. Once he put his foot down, getting him to change his mind was a serious uphill battle. She said she wished there was some way to get through to that hard-headed man. Natsuki caught a flicker of real frustration in Hikari's voice when she talked about her dad. Hikari caught herself and apologized to Natsuki for going off like that. The two kept walking, and she said she was going to figure it out no matter what. Hikari loved the beach. It was gorgeous, it felt amazing, and the cold water was everything. On top of that, she loved how staring out at that endless ocean helped her push through whatever was weighing on her. Natsuki let that sink in. He'd fallen for Hikari's looks. Now it was her heart that was getting to him. Since he still didn't know her that well, he was going to keep getting closer, learning more and more about who she really was. The group was all together, and Natsuki pulled up the photo of the beach. Perfect choice. Not to mention the cottage Natsuki had picked out. It was going to fit everyone's budget. Uta thanked Natsuki for thinking everything through. But hey, he was the one with the most free time. Plus, he'd been binge-watching way too many videos of outgoing teens spending their summers in beach cottages. Since the more people they brought, the cheaper the place got, it made sense to invite more people. So Uta thought about bringing Miori and Seri. Who on earth was Seri? Even Natsuki had no idea. Reita was immediately on board. It'd definitely be more fun for him if they came. Hikari said awkwardly that she still hadn't gotten permission to go, and that she might not get it at all, so she was sorry in advance. Tatsuya asked if there wasn't some way to work it out, since it really wouldn't be the same without Hikari there. Everyone was genuinely shocked to hear that coming from Tatsuya. But okay, Hikari was touched to hear it. Uta even found it funny. Tatsuya being sweet was the last thing anyone expected. Summer break had finally arrived, and with it, big dreams and hopeful hearts, or at least it was supposed to feel hopeful. But Natsuki didn't have any plans for the first week. Namika thanked him for the food and headed back inside. Since Natsuki's parents were at work, he spent his mornings watching over his little sister, and most afternoons, he was at his job. Ueno asked Natsuki if he'd be free after work, because she wanted to hit up the mall and do some shopping. Yeah, he was free, and he'd tag along with Ueno. At the mall, the two were browsing some clothes until Ueno asked Natsuki's opinion on a bikini. He looked away, embarrassed, and really didn't want to answer that. Ueno noticed the awkwardness and went off to find her bikini on her own. Natsuki drifted away, wondering why Yuino even wanted him there in the first place. The two had already finished shopping and had stopped to chat about the bikini, when suddenly Hikari called out to them, and standing right next to her was her dad, who asked, completely stone-faced, whether these were friends of his daughters. He introduced himself as Sei, Hikari's father. He told Yuino it was good to see her again, and asked if the boy was Natsuki, since Hikari talked about him all the time. Then, about the trip, Sei asked both of them if they were going, and that's when everything went sideways. Hikari had told him it was going to be girls only, because she knew her dad wouldn't allow it if boys were involved. Sei looked Natsuki dead in the eyes, like he was staring straight into his soul. And right then, Natsuki remembered Sei. He was the president of a company where Natsuki had tried to land a job in another timeline, but who was still just the vice president in this one. So Hikari's dad told her he wasn't going to let her go on that trip, that maybe, if she hadn't lied to him, things would have been different. Hikari felt her heart just sink. All hope drained out of her. The two of them walked away. Yuino and Natsuki went to grab dinner. The whole vibe was heavy and awkward after what had just gone down. Yuino said that Hikari had told her she really wanted to make that trip happen, even if her dad said no. Yuino and Hikari had started talking in 3rd grade. Back then, Hikari was a lonely girl. She didn't open up much, she didn't stand out. Yuino, on the other hand, was the total opposite. She was the center of attention, bubbly and outgoing. Then one day, she decided to go talk to Hikari for the first time. From that moment on, they became friends, best friends. Then one day, Hikari invited Yuino over to her house. The atmosphere was a little tense, but Sei warmed up to Yuino and made it clear he wanted Hikari to be more like her. After that, Hikari's behavior shifted. She got really good at hiding what she was feeling, and she was probably hurting way more than anyone realized. Then Yuino asked Natsuki straight up if he liked Hikari. He said yes, absolutely. He cared about her a lot. Yuino wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to Natsuki, telling him he needed to be there for Hikari, because he was probably the person who was going to help her find her way. Natsuki headed to a coffee shop to meet up with Hikari. They found each other and he sat down to talk. Hikari was a little embarrassed that Yuino had told him where she was, but it was fine. Natsuki pointed at the laptop, wanting to confirm that what Hikari was writing was a novel. He totally peeked. Hikari said it was a secret. She kept it hidden because she was embarrassed by it, so she didn't want anyone asking to read it, except for Natsuki. He was the one person she'd actually let read it. At first, she'd wanted Yuino to read the novel to give her feedback, point out what was missing, where it could be better. But now, she wanted Natsuki to do that instead. And that's exactly what he did. He read the whole thing, told her she completely surprised him. The story was really good, then asked if the novel was the reason she wanted to go to the beach. Hikari said it wasn't exactly that. She just wanted to have fun. She'd written the story because the beach meant so much to her. Someday, Hikari wanted to become a real, accomplished writer. Natsuki was already in bed, lost in his own thoughts, replaying his goodbye with Hikari in his head, where she'd thanked him for everything. He kept thinking about how Hikari's mood had been all over the place, how her expression would shut down out of nowhere right in the middle of a smile. When Natsuki checked his phone, he saw a message from Hikari. She was at a train station near his house. That hit him with a wave of worry, so he called her immediately. On the call, Hikari said she had no curfew to get back home by anymore, because she'd run away. Natsuki took off running toward the train station like a madman. The second he hung up the phone, no second thoughts, no hesitation. He arrived out of breath, eyes scanning every inch of the platform, until he finally spotted Hikari sitting alone on a bench with that look on her face like she was holding back a whole storm inside. They started talking, and it was true. Hikari had run away from home. She just couldn't take the constant clashes with her dad anymore. All that pressure had finally hit a breaking point. Natsuki tried to comfort her, told her everything was going to be okay, but deep down, his brain was already in problem-solving mode. The trains would stop running soon, and Hikari had nowhere to go. Of course, he invited her to crash at his place. And of course, she said yes. The two of them got to his house, and it was the first time in Hikari's life she'd ever set foot in a guy's bedroom. She was expecting chaos, the classic teenage disaster zone, but Natsuki's room was so clean and organized that her jaw literally dropped. Natsuki, on the inside, was fully convinced he'd just stepped into a rom-com. It was the middle of the night. The girl he liked was standing in his bedroom. Bro, his life had turned into a manga. Hikari wandered over to his bookshelf, and honestly, watching her do that was incredibly satisfying. It was obvious Natsuki was a full-on certified nerd, and she found that actually pretty cool. Then, out of nowhere, the door swings open. Namika walks in, catching them both completely off guard. She just wanted to grab another manga, but the second she took in the scene, she flashed this sly little smile and apologized for interrupting. Natsuki stepped out to the living room to talk to his sister, who immediately grabbed him by the shirt and asked, buzzing with curiosity, whether Hikari was his girlfriend. He explained that she was going through a rough time and just needed a place to stay for the night. No big deal. Namika still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that her brother had brought a girl home. And not just any girl, a gorgeous one at that. It genuinely felt like something straight out of a movie. She asked if she should tell their mom, but no, that would be way too complicated to explain. Their parents were spending the night out for work, so the coast was clear, though Natsuki knew full well his sister was going to be a handful regardless. Namika then said, with this grin like she was absolutely loving every second of it, that she'd better sleep in the living room, because of all the noise they'd be making during the night. Natsuki immediately bonked her on the head. He had made it very clear that Hikari was just a friend. Namika acted genuinely confused, like friends who sleep over? Had her brother suddenly become the main character of an adult film? Anyway, Natsuki headed back to his room and let Hikari know he'd convinced his sister to drop it. He turned on the AC because of the heat and helped Hikari get settled for a shower, grabbed a towel, pulled out a change of clothes, but Hikari had packed her own stuff in her bag because the original plan had been to stay at a hotel for a few days. Natsuki was ready to help however he could, no questions asked. While Hikari was in the shower, Namika went to bring her the towel. She was going to leave it with the clothes until she caught a glimpse of Hikari's bra and stood there completely floored by the size. Natsuki, meanwhile, was meditating on the couch in the living room, actively trying to keep his thoughts clean. Hikari was spending the night, and he needed to be her safe space. He needed to stay focused on that. Then she stepped out of the shower. In her pajamas, hair still wet, towel draped over her shoulder, and she just came and sat right next to him, casually drying her hair like it was the most normal thing in the world. Natsuki asked where she'd rather sleep, the living room? His mom's room? Hikari shook her head at both options. She wanted to stay with him, and so that's what happened. Hikari was sitting on a futon in Natsuki's room, staring at her phone in silence. Natsuki came in carrying 2 cups of tea, and the two of them sat there talking quietly while her dad kept blowing up her phone. She'd told her mom she was at a friend's house, so for now, things were fine. But what had actually gone down was heavy. Hikari had come home barely within curfew, and her dad immediately got in her face asking what she was doing with her life. She explained she'd been at a cafe, working on the book with her friends. That's when Sei flipped the switch, told her to stop writing romance novels, to do something that actually mattered, to stop wasting her time, and if she didn't, he'd cut off her entire social life. It was one or the other. Hikari refused, and that was different. The old Hikari would have caved immediately, would have cut off every friendship without blinking. But the Hikari of today couldn't do that anymore, because today, both things mattered to her equally. Yuino had always been by her side, and then came Uta, Reita, Natsuki, Tatsuya. Before she even realized it, they'd all become real friends. Friends she couldn't just throw away like that. But the fear was real. It had been so long since the last time she'd stood up to her dad. And when she used to push back, she was just a kid. And even then, she got punished for it. So little by little, Hikari had learned to obey. She became a puppet on a string, controlled at every turn. She'd always been a quiet, melancholy, closed-off kid, and her dad had never been able to stand that. So Hikari decided to reinvent herself. She became the ideal daughter, popular, cheerful, sweet, all just to please him. But playing a character had never been that hard for her, maybe because she'd been writing stories her whole life. She even showed Natsuki an old photo, from back when she had no friends, and books were the only comfort she had. She started out reading and then moved to writing, because she wanted to reach more people through those stories. It was the middle of the night. Namika was already completely knocked out in bed in a deep sleep, but Hikari and Natsuki hadn't slept at all. Hikari brought up something out of nowhere and said, pretty directly, that she liked him. Natsuki nearly stopped breathing, but then she finished the sentence, that she liked him and all their other friends. Oh, so she meant as a friend. She also admitted that at first she found him super annoying because he seemed good at everything without even trying. Come on, Hikari. My heart can't take this, he said. She smiled and kept going. After that argument Natsuki had with Tatsuya, she was finally able to see just how similar the two of them actually were, and that changed everything. Morning finally came. Natsuki was woken up by Hikari's face right up close to his, telling him he looked adorable when he slept. His face turned completely red and he told her she looked beautiful, and it would have been a perfect moment if Namika hadn't shown up in the doorway demanding breakfast. Everyone eating, everyone together. Namika took the opportunity to ask Hikari directly, were they dating? Because, according to her, dating Natsuki was not exactly recommended. Natsuki loved having Hikari there, but he knew she couldn't stay forever. After breakfast, he washed the dishes and headed to his room, and walked straight in on Hikari changing. He froze there, eyes wide, taking in the whole thing. But the second reality caught up with him. He bolted. The The two of them sat on the bed afterward, sitting with the secondhand embarrassment of that moment in painful silence. Like, there was absolutely zero reason for him to just stand there staring like that. Anyway, Natsuki got straight to the point. Running away from home wasn't going to change her dad's mind. Hikari was going to have to fight and win. To talk it through properly, away from Namika and all the interruptions, the two of them hopped on the train. On the way, Hikari mentioned that Natsuki seemed to know her dad pretty well. He brushed it off, said he'd just read up on Sei on the company's website. They got to the cafe and Hikari was direct. She was going to prove to her dad that she could write something worth reading. Maybe then he'd finally hear her out. The truth was that Sei actually liked reading novels, so much so that Hikari had only started reading in the first place because of the books she'd see in his study. Maybe he'd never fully forgive her for standing up to him, but she had to try. And Natsuki promised to help her however he could. The two of them worked for a long while, until, already late at night, Natsuki got a call from Ueno. She'd shown up at the cafe in person, asking why Hikari hadn't said a word to her about running away. Hikari explained. She'd always leaned on Ueno for everything, and this time she wanted it to be different. Ueno understood, and said she was going to help Hikari face her dad too. That night, she'd stay at Ueno's place. Hikari pulled her into a long, tight hug. She genuinely loved this girl. Natsuki got home and Namika immediately asked where Hikari was. Such a bummer that she'd left. Namika had actually really liked her. Already in bed, Natsuki got a call. It was Hikari. She had some questions. What do you think of me? He said he thought she was a kind and cheerful girl. And then the questions just kept coming. Why do you value your friends? Why did you want to be different in high school? What's the rest of your family like? What was middle school like for you? Do you want to date someone? What kind of girl do you like? And then, the last one. Is there someone you like right now? Natsuki said yes. There was someone he liked. The call ended, but that last question kept echoing in his head. Because he was catching feelings for two people equally, and that was something he couldn't say out loud. Hikari said she thought she knew who it was, and the problem was that Natsuki had made some pretty obvious moves around her, on top of that outing with Uta. Natsuki was always stuck like this. The next day everyone met up at the cafe, and Hikari's writing had gotten so much better. You could really see how much she'd grown. That's when Sei walked in. He stepped inside calling out for Hikari, telling her to come home and stop causing problems for everyone around her. Natsuki grabbed her hand right then, just to make her feel more grounded, and Hikari faced her dad head-on without flinching. Natsuki stepped in alongside her, telling Sei that, for the record, Hikari wasn't inconveniencing anyone here. Hikari said she'd go home, but in return, she demanded to be heard. Sei knew what this was about and reminded her that life would be a lot easier if she just did what he said. You're wrong, she said. I get to decide how I live my own life. She called him stubborn, told him to stop projecting his own feelings onto her. Sei said he understood, that he'd lived under his own father's rules too, but he'd become a successful man because of it, and he wanted Hikari to take that as a lesson. But I know I won't be happy living that way. Sei started raising his voice, and Hikari didn't let him finish. Are you actually happy? The company might be doing great, but you and mom haven't been okay for a long time. You have money, but you don't have a family. I hate you. How can you say you're happy? Are you too scared to admit you're wrong? Silence swallowed the room. I'm not like you. I'm going to live my own life, even if I make mistakes along the way. Then without another word, Hikari turned the laptop to face her dad and asked him to read the novel. If he thought it was good, he'd have to accept that she was done being a puppet. Sei looked his daughter dead in the eyes. He stood up, said he would accept her terms then but asked her to leave. The others rallied around Hikari, told her it was going to be okay, and she left. Natsuki still had his doubts about whether Hikari would get everything she'd asked for. Sei was the type who moved people around like pieces on a chessboard. But like he himself had once said, people with independent minds are valuable. And as for the job interview Sei had shot down, well, in this version of events, that didn't matter anymore. Natsuki's first summer vacation in high school was gray, dull, and completely lifeless. After Tatsuya ditched him, he spent a solid chunk of time just grinding basketball in silence. Nobody was around. No Uta, no Reita, no Ueno, and definitely not his beloved Hikari. Sometimes he'd run into Miori, but they wouldn't even look at each other. Natsuki would get home and just bury himself in video games, romance novels, or anime. Anything to escape reality. But now, Natsuki gets a shot at making this summer actually mean something. Everyone was all packed up and ready for the trip, Hikari included. The whole crew was on the train, and both Uta and Hikari kept sneaking glances at Natsuki like they couldn't help themselves. They tried to play it cool, sure, but it wasn't working. Not even a little. Sarika was there too. She leaned over and asked Natsuki what kind of person he was. Problem was, he didn't even know how to answer that himself. That's when Hikari stepped in and did him the favor. She rattled off that Natsuki stands 5 feet 10, weighs about 143 pounds, that his favorite foods are ramen and omuritsu, that his name is tied to the season he was born, August 28th, that his hobbies are reading, working out, and basketball. Uta practically jumped on Hikari, totally calling her out for knowing so much about Natsuki. But he was the one who told Hikari all that stuff himself, back when they finally got the chance to really talk. Sarika fired off another question. Were Natsuki and Uta dating? It came completely out of nowhere. Both of them froze. The truth was, Sarika had spotted them together at the festival, right outside Uta's house. They got flustered fast. They both knew exactly what she was getting at. Hikari flashed that little smile, the kind that says I will commit crimes, and asked if something had happened between them, but Uta just said Natsuki had walked her home. Hikari pretended to let it go. After a while, the silence made things kind of awkward, so Natsuki decided to break the ice and brought up Sarika's band, the one where she plays guitar. Sarika's been playing since middle school. Natsuki used to play guitar too, a little. He got into it back in college, bought a Stratocaster, but since he never really improved, he eventually gave it up. Maybe he would have stuck with it if he'd had friends to start a band with, though that might just be an excuse he tells himself. Sarika's eyes lit up at that. She invited Natsuki to join the band since he wasn't in any club. She could talk about music all day. Same with Natsuki and rock. And as the conversation kept flowing, they realized their music taste was almost identical. Natsuki and Sarika were totally on the same wavelength. Meanwhile, Uta and Hikari just stood there watching, kind of sidelined. Then Reita showed up to announce they were getting off at the next stop. They finally made it to the house. The place was huge. The window looking straight out at the ocean got everyone hyped, especially Hikari, who was already soaking in the whole vibe. This was a major W for her and Natsuki both. They'd been through a lot to get here. The three guys hit the beach, and the moment they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. Reita's brain had already painted a whole picture of the girls in bikinis. Tatsuya nudged Natsuki, pushing him to just admit how pumped he was to see them. Natsuki said yeah, obviously he wanted to, and then the girls showed up, looking like they'd just walked off the cover of a summer magazine. Natsuki kind of short-circuited until Sarika called him over and asked him to feel her body. She wanted his take on her figure. Uta and Tatsuya launched straight into the water, diving in headfirst like they were born on the beach. Same with Miori and Reita heading in side by side. Yuino wanted to take everything in slowly, so she chilled under the umbrella for a bit. Sarika went to inflate her pool float first, and that left Hikari and Natsuki. The two of them watched Reita and Miori. Those two were acting like a couple already. Nobody had heard anything official, but they were way too close for it not to be a thing. It was only a matter of time before they made it official. In the middle of all that, Hikari accidentally touched Natsuki. A wave of goosebumps hit him, the good kind. But then she held onto his arm because she had something to ask. It was about her bikini. She wanted Natsuki's honest opinion. He gave it to her. Hikari looked stunning. She returned the compliment, said Natsuki looked really good with his athletic build, straight up radiating main character energy. Out of nowhere, this super cute little kid showed up with sparkling eyes and the sweetest little smile. Two more kids followed right behind, carrying her along. Randomly adorable moment. No notes. Hikari decided it was time to get in the water. They were wasting daylight, but the ground had other plans and pulled her into a wipeout. Natsuki, ever the gentleman, reached out his hand to help her up. She's such a disaster. Better not to rush her. Uta called out to both of them, and finally, no more stalling, they ran in and jumped into the ocean. Tatsuya and Natsuki immediately turned it into a competition. Who's the faster swimmer? Uta was cheering her lungs out for Natsuki. Meanwhile, Tatsuya had to literally beg for someone, anyone, to root for him, poor guy. But then he stopped and just accepted it. He'd lost again. Natsuki drifted out to float on the waves for a bit. Miori was not about to let him relax with her pool float. She went all in, trying to get it back. Then came the banana boat. Natsuki had to tap out. He was cooked. Yuino came through and handed him a water bottle to get him back on his feet. Natsuki thanked her. Yuino is genuinely the mom friend of the group. Meanwhile, Sarika was building this massive sandcastle. Natsuki wandered over to check it out. He'd never seen sandcastle craftsmanship at this level. Sarika's a total perfectionist. She'd been working on it for 2 straight hours without a break. But if Natsuki remembers this moment, then it was all worth it. The sun was starting to dip, and everyone gathered under the beach umbrella. Uta pressed an ice-cold bottle against Natsuki's forehead just to mess with him, but that smile of hers made his head spin. Hikari did the same thing to him. Part of the group headed out to grab groceries for dinner. Sarika, being Sarika, straight up asked Reita if he and Miori were together. His answer? Not yet. Night fell. Time to eat. Tatsuya was supposed to handle the grill. Uta made the rice. Yuino and Hikari were on sides and sauces, but Uta told Tatsuya to step aside. She was taking over the grill. She gave Natsuki the best cut of meat. He'd earned it. Natsuki was the one who planned everything and made this whole trip happen. Tatsuya showed up just to back her up, confirming that despite what you might expect, Uta had an insane talent for getting the meat perfectly done. She wasn't sure what he meant by, despite what you might expect. She got so annoyed she decided Tatsuya was only getting the burned pieces from that point on. Everyone dug into the meat Uta grilled, and there was no arguing with the results. It slapped. The night was genuinely fun, with Tatsuya camped next to the grill, eating non-stop. Natsuki, though, slipped away to the other side of the house, happy, really happy, that he'd made the right call for this summer. Hikari found him there, said she'd eaten until she physically couldn't anymore. The sky full of stars only made the moment hit harder. Hikari slipped her hand into Natsuki's. He was holding hands with the first girl he'd ever truly fallen for. He should have been the happiest guy alive. If only his heart wasn't so divided. Maybe he didn't deserve to be holding her hand right then. Hikari let go. She could feel it. It didn't sit right with her either. Then Uta appeared out of nowhere, calling everyone back to wrap up the cookout, since Tatsuya had completely shut down. Not surprising. Honestly, it was a miracle he hadn't tried to eat the grill itself. Sarika showed up too, with a pretty fun idea. She'd picked up some sparklers and time to light them up. Sarika went first. She looked like a wizard with a magic wand. Uta lit two at the same time. Hikari had no idea what she was doing. The surprise made her grab onto Natsuki out of pure reflex. Sarika still had a whole bunch left. They burned through them all. And finally, it was done. Things got quiet. Uta pulled Natsuki to the side. She brought up his birthday, coming up soon. It probably wasn't a surprise that she remembered. After all, it was the birthday of the guy she liked. But what she really wanted was for Natsuki to tell her what he wanted as a gift. He had no idea. That wasn't a problem, though. Uta was going to think it over until she figured out something he'd actually love. The sparkler burned out. It made Natsuki wonder why fireworks and sparklers are always over so fast, even when they're so beautiful and bright while they last. Bedtime finally came. Natsuki could barely sleep. A million things ran through his head. The kind of thoughts that made him want to change not just how he looked on the outside, but stop being the kind of guy he felt like he'd been. The teenage life Natsuki had always wanted was right there within reach, but he was lost, not knowing which path he was going to take. He rolled over and saw the sun coming up, and figured he'd take a walk. He followed some footprints in the sand, and they led him straight to Hikari. Natsuki sat down beside her and they started talking. Both of them felt like the ocean was their safe place. The waves roll in and out, carrying calm with them and pulling the anxiety under. You could stare at it forever. All of it made Hikari want to rewrite the whole romance from scratch, like she'd thought before. There are things you can't put into words without actually feeling them first, and standing there watching the ocean, she felt like she could write something so much better. Because more than anything, she wanted her readers to feel exactly what they were feeling right in that moment. That book was more than fiction. The characters just changed their faces and names when they made it onto the page. That story was a reflection of Hikari's life, or maybe of her deepest wishes. She stood up and let the water wash over her feet. Mind made up, Hikari told Natsuki the path she'd chosen. She was going to compete with Uta, and Natsuki knew exactly what that meant. Summer ended. On August 28th, Natsuki's birthday, Uta gave him the gift she'd promised, and Hikari wrote a short story. After that, Natsuki went back to everyday life. He got stopped in the hall by Sarika, who called him out to join the band. She said she wanted to change the world with the music the two of them would make together.